Hi, everybody. I'm Jay.
And I'm Brian.
We're popping in here with a very special announcement. For the month of March, we are releasing 5 new episodes, and we need your help.
That's right. If you listen to Film Strip Podcast on Apple Podcasts, CastBox, Google Podcasts, or Stitcher, we need you to leave us a written review for the show. These help the show reach a bigger audience, and that is what we want to do. Expand the reach. Even if you listen on another platform, you can still write a review on Apple Podcasts.
So as a gift back to you for this, for every 5-star written review we receive, we're opening up the suggestion box to you all.
That's right. At the end of your review, leave a comment with a movie you want us to review. Only caveat is it has to be something we haven't already reviewed. For a list, check out the archives.
So at the end of March, we'll gather all the suggestions and we'll pull a winner out of the hat and review that movie in one of the coming summer months when we're usually doing our bi-weekly release. We'll do a special bonus show.
We know we need the reviews to help expand the show's reach, and we figured since we were asking for this, least we could do is take a suggestion from one of you for our future show.
And so once again, leave us a 5-star written review on Apple, CastBox, Google, or Stitcher sometime in the month of March. Suggest a movie you want us to review, and at the end of March, we'll pull the suggestions and select a bonus review from you, our fabulous audience.
Now, on with the show.
Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504(c)(2), Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Kurt.
And this is our review of Full Metal Jacket, starring Matthew Modine, Vincent D'Onofrio, Adam Baldwin, Dorian Harewood, Arliss Howard, Edo Ross, and R. Lee Ermey. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, adapted from The Short Timers by Gustav Hasford. Released in 1987 on a $30 million budget, grossed $120 million at the box office. So, Kurt, I remember specifically when this came out in 1987 because my dad, who was in the military during the time of Vietnam but didn't serve at Vietnam, thought it was very important that me and my brother understood what Vietnam was like. So he took us to see 2 movies in the theater. Oliver Stallone's Platoon and this movie. And I was all of 11 years old when this came out, and I had never heard some of the things R. Lee Ermey says in the world at that point. And I'm not sure I've ever heard them in any other context except this movie either. But this movie certainly made an impression on me, and it's something that I've remembered being a part of a swing of movies in the late 1980s where we were, quote, ready to deal with Vietnam.
Oh yeah, this is a movie that's been in the pop culture. It has never left the pop culture since it's come out. Like, you constantly hear quotes from it in some way or another. The first time I saw it, much like other Kubrick movies, I knew of it years before I saw it. It was referred to in sitcoms. Like, I remember an episode of Third Rock from the Sun where Sally, being a male soldier trapped in a woman's body, voted to rent Full Metal Jacket as a movie for girls' night. And of course, I'd see R. Lee Ermey in various other movies playing this character and stuff like The Simpsons and in Peter Jackson's The Frighteners, where it's such a weird role, but he's great in that, playing the exact same character, exact same clothes and everything. And I actually saw the climactic scene of the first act on TV. And even though that spoiled the movie for me, it was one of those things where even though it was spoiled, it's like, I still want to see this, whatever the hell this is. And so when I was getting into all the Kubrick movies around, 2007 or 8, picked up Full Metal Jacket, and I seem to recall liking it right away, and it definitely left me shook up when it was over.
Yeah, and it's a strange movie, even for a Kubrick movie, because it's just under 2 hours, and it feels like it's only in 2 parts, too. Like, there's no third act, or maybe there was never intended to be. It's almost like this wicked, elaborate $30 million stage play that he's having done outside in all these places. And I've always remembered this movie because I always felt like it was the movie that didn't have an ending. And honestly, its best ending was at the middle of it. And then everything that happened afterward, I didn't really remember. Like all the Vietnam stuff, watching it this time, it could have been the first time I've seen it. I've probably seen this movie half a dozen times through the years. And I remembered so little about what happens in really what I call the second act of this movie. Everything that was impressionable is in that first half when they're all at boot camp on Paris Island.
Oh yeah, that's the thing about this movie is, when I say it's never left the pop culture and it's always getting quoted, it's everything from the first, 40 minutes, that's where Arlie Ermy is and everything. And that is one of the things people always mention immediately. Like if ever I post on Facebook, I'm watching Full Metal Jacket, it's just like ticking down the clock. When is someone going to mention that, the only thing worthwhile in the movie is the first act? And which happened every time I, would talk about the movie after I first saw it. And I was always taken aback by that because I'm the guy, I guess I'm the only guy who might possibly prefer the second half of this movie to the first half.
I don't know if you're the only guy, but you're the only guy on this podcast that does. That's for sure. So we'll talk about that. That's interesting though, because I've had conversations about this movie for years with people, and I think I've even had one with you online and offline about it. And all I really remember is the stuff from the front. And it's not just Arlie Ermy, though this did mint him as part of popular culture. I mean, at this point, he was a retired Marine looking for work and got brought on as, the story is he got brought on as the consultant to try to make the actor sound like the gunnery sergeant. And he finally just did it enough that everybody said, why don't you just let him do it, Stanley? And he did a couple takes with him. It was like, okay. And there's all that, urban legend, like it's all one continuous take. And if you know anything about Kubrick movies, that is not the case at all. It's like cut in mid-line sometimes, with him. So he did a ton of takes, but he did that first bit around the barracks or whatever with him as a test run. And he just never stopped talking. And Stanley was blown away by this guy that could just, hurl out not only obscenities, but instructions in an authoritarian tone. And to hear Ermy tell it, he said, there's no drill sergeant in the world that talks like that. He said, it's just the heightened reality of every drill sergeant that ever existed.
Yeah, every time I watch this movie, I'm always curious about that. Is like, where is the line between what a real drill sergeant would do and what Kubrick came up with for, his quote unquote villain of the movie to do? Because I know that a lot of some of the lines are Ermy's himself. Because like you said, like he was the consultant, and as I understand it, he actually went to wardrobe and asked for a drill sergeant uniform, so just so he can really get into character for the consultant part. And Kubrick was watching him, and he started writing down all this stuff Ermy was saying. It's like, this is way better than the stuff we came up with.
Yeah, it was better than the stuff that Hasford had remembered too, from being in the Marines. That's the thing, is to say this is based on anything, and Hasford gets, writing credit of the script here. It was loosely based on the book he wrote about his semi-autobiographical time in the Marine Corps during Vietnam. But even he'll tell you that a lot of what happens here is just stuff that he and Stanley Kubrick dreamed up on the set. And to hear the actors tell it, they were writing this in process. Like there was never a real script. It just sort of pages floated around, kind of like The Shining, and it just, one day he even asked people, how do y'all want to end this? And so it just went on forever. And then they finally just cut it off and sent it to the theater.
Yeah, that does stand out. That's a whole thing about this movie is there really isn't a plot. The first act of the movie does have a beginning, middle, and end, and the second act is very sort of, it's like there are no deleted scenes on the DVD, and this is like Kubrick was famous for deleting and burning everything that didn't make it into the movie. So who knows if there is something else he had intended. To
hear the actors tell it, there's a lot of like scenery shots that never made the movie or whatever, but there was no dialogue to tell you what any of it was. It was just helicopters sweeping over rice fields and, more of the same. So when they got down to cutting this up and editing it, this is just what they went with. But yeah, you're right. Kubrick's notorious for, well, fine, if it's not in there, this is the director's cut, and he just burns everything else from existence. But not only R. Lee Ermey, like this, Matthew Modine was a thing to get in 1986, 1987. He was on his way up, and you got a lot of other young actors here who've worked for years. I mean, I've seen Edo Ross and stuff. I've seen Arliss Howard in things, Adam Baldwin, unfortunately, in a lot of things, and most unfortunately now on Twitter. But I mean, he's all over. But really, I think the things you remember from this are R. Lee Ermey, Matthew Modine, and then Vincent D'Onofrio, who has had such a storied career and has played nothing like this, the rest of his career, except maybe The Cell or something like that. But he is such a neat presence here. And to hear him tell it, like he would not have a film career if it wasn't for Stanley Kubrick, because he took a shot at him when he was nobody and minted him.
Oh yeah, he was really nobody, as I understand it. I mean, I think he might have been working as a stage actor, but his day job was like as a bouncer. So he really and it is so weird that this is, I bet you that was an issue with Kubrick, is, this is a movie where it's gonna you can't get seasoned pros like Jack Nicholson or Ryan O'Neal, who was seasoned at the time. Like these are all guys who, some of them, it's their first, major gig at all, especially, and like R. Lee Ermey. I don't know if I think he's in one shot of Apocalypse Now, but aside from that, he never had any on camera work really.
No, and then he had another 20 years of it afterward, and even had a show on the History Channel. Of course, he's now passed away, but I mean, he became a thing at the back quarter of his life. And I mean, we've reviewed him before in Seven. If people go back and listen to that in the archives, we both loved him as the police captain, because his dry sense of humor is on display, even though he's not randomly cursing people out, so at this. And I do think it's neat that you mentioned The Frighteners, though, because I've heard tell, and Peter Jackson kind of waffles on it, but I heard Arlie Ermey basically say he just considered that was Hartman's ghost, whether they called it that or not. He just thought it was. He's like, well, Hartman kind of lightened up in the afterlife, a little bit. But I thought that was good. So,
oh yeah, that'd be awesome if if his name takes had Sergeant Hartman on it.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? You're right. It's one of those great film Easter eggs you can put together. Well, I do think you're right, though, that there's a lot that happens in this, but there's not necessarily a plot. But I think we need to give people one anyway, because I don't know how many people have revisited Full Metal Jacket recently, or watched the whole thing at least. So, Kurt, why don't you tell people what the plot of Full Metal Jacket is, and then we'll get into talking about it.
Sure thing. We begin with the new Marine Corps recruits, our main characters, arriving at boot camp and are introduced to their brutal drill instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, whose job is to reshape these young men into killing machines to be deployed into the Vietnam War. We get to know 3 of these recruits: Private Joker, our narrator, Private Cowboy, and Private Gomer Pyle, who Sergeant Hartman decides to constantly make an example out of for his incompetence and being out of shape. Over the course of this boot camp, the recruits undergo an extreme physical training routine while being trained in close quarters combat as well as firearms. And Hartman winds up turning the entire boot camp against Private Pyle in an effort to tear him down and rebuild him as a killer, which ends up working wonders as Private Pyle loses his mind entirely, and the night of his graduation from boot camp kills Sergeant Hartman and then himself. We then jump to Da Nang, Vietnam in January 1969, where Private Joker is now a combat correspondent, a journalist working for Stars and Stripes magazine, where Joker mainly reports on low-end combat encounters and ceremonies and is enjoying a very safe time in Vietnam until after the famous Tet Offensive, after which he is sent into the middle of the country. Joker actually winds up meeting Private Cowboy from boot camp and joins up with the Lost Hog Squad, along with such Marines that go by names such as Animal Mother and 8-Ball. Despite dealing with daily horrors, Private Joker manages to maintain his sense of humor and attitude that he probably had before he joined the Marines. But one fateful day, the Lost Hog Squad encounters a sniper that kills 8-Ball and Private Cowboy. The Lost Hog Squad gets the drop on the sniper, who turns out to be a teenage girl. The Lost Hog Squad demands that Joker kill her personally, as the sniper is actually begging to be shot. Joker delivers the coup de grace, thus ending Joker's pleasant disposition and ending his transition from sensible human being to soulless killer. We end with the Lost Hog Squad and a larger group of soldiers marching through bombed-out Vietnam, singing the tune to the Mickey Mouse March.
Yeah, wow. Again, for a movie that really doesn't have a plot, the beginning, middle, and end all happen in the first 40, 45 minutes. A lot of things happen, but I think it's easy to see that everything we're to view here and everything we're to care about here is through the lens of Private Joker. And that's supposed to be the Hesford character. And I find it amazing that outside of Pyle and Hartman, nobody else has a real name in this entire thing, except like, random lieutenants here and there and stuff that we don't care about. It's Joker, Cowboy, Snowball, Pyle, whose real name is Leonard, Crazy Earl, Doc J, 8-Ball, Animal Mother, what a name. I mean, right? Like they all go by these sort of call sign nickname things. And, that became like a popular thing after Top Gun, that people were all about that. And I almost feel like Kubrick in some ways is sort of taking a slap at that and going like, that all looks cool and fun, but here's what reality and war is like. And the first scene are these guys sitting in chairs, getting their long hair shaved, completely down while this random country and western song about going to Vietnam is going on in the background. And it's like all of their humanity is being stripped away from them.
That is one of the more striking opening images of that thing about Kubrick. Every movie he does, he opens with something that either takes your breath away or something that makes you think. And this image of them getting, I don't know if that's exactly how every Marine Corps barber shaves the hair, but what is happening is like they're having almost like male pattern baldness shaved in their heads. Almost like they're having their youth taken away from them immediately as a sign of how their lives are going to end up in their, Vietnam careers.
Yeah, as far as I know from everybody that's been in the Marines and the military, that, they shave you straight down, and they keep it that way throughout boot camp, and then you're allowed to grow it a little bit here and there. And, you see the guys later in Vietnam, they got hair all over the place because it got real lax and loose. Nowadays in the military, you got to keep it a certain regulation and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, this is what happens to you in boot camp. I mean, my brother joined the Army. This is what his hair got shaved down to. It was just stripping it all the way down. And there's actually a practical reason for it. Like if you go all the way back in histories of military, it was just to like make sure lice didn't get in with everybody else. But it also became a thing like, everybody looks the same for the most part, right? You don't have to worry about your hair. You don't have to worry about any of that. What you're to worry about is all the orders I'm giving you. And in the middle of all of Hartman's instructions, where he's calling them, lowest pieces of slime on earth and, less than maggots and all this kind of stuff, is that he's telling them, I am telling you this because I hate all of you equally. I don't care if you're black, you're Jewish, you're Christian, you're this, that, Italian, whatever. I'm cutting you all down to the absolute bare bones of you as a living organism so that I can build you back up to be the thing that I need you to do. And what I need you to do is go and kill for our country. And the only way to do that is to completely wash you of what you were and turn you into something else. So all of them wearing regulation glasses that have to wear glasses now. The rest of them, they're all dressed in white t-shirts and white boxers. I mean, it's all about uniformity and no more individuality. And what's the first thing that happens? In the middle of this speech, Joker breaks out a John Wayne impression and gets himself clocked for it.
Oh yeah, and yeah, you obviously like Hartman does explain kind of what he's doing, but you obviously put it more delicately than he does. And this is actually a movie where the more I learn about the military, and you watch interviews and you watch a lot of drill instructor videos, which are very entertaining to me. The more yelling, the better. And but when you hear them explain I remember asking my dad, watching a clip of Full Metal Jacket, I was like, why are they constantly screaming at you all day? And he says, well, they want to break you down to nothing so that they can build you up into something. And of course, Kubrick, he takes that a little bit, he takes that to the extreme, as he does with everything.
Yeah, and I mean, again, my brother was in the Army, and he said, yeah, guys would use some rough language on you. No, nothing like this. Most of the time, if you listen to, if you watch videos of new Navy recruits or something like that, and they're coming in and everybody's yelling at them, one reason they're yelling is there's 500 people yelling at the same time. So I got to make sure you hear me, the 12 people in front of me. And the other part of it is to get your attention and to make you realize you're going to have to respond, and they're constantly giving you information. Because one thing you learn about being in the military is that you have to deal with and process an enormous amount of information and make snap decisions on it just like that. Like, you can't wait to write it out or research a paper about it or any of that kind of stuff. If you're in the field and you're in combat, you have to think very quickly. And the only way to learn how to do that is to have people scream at you 23 hours a day to try to get your brain wired for that. And I mean, I remember my brother, they would make them memorize like the sports page, and they would ask him like, okay, who got 3 hits in the bottom of the 5th? You know, and I mean, if you didn't know it, you were running or doing push-ups or whatever. And so you learned how to know that random bit of nothing and spit it back to them, because one, you didn't want to have to run and do the extra push-ups. And the other part was because you were training your brain to upload a ton of information at once and then give an answer back as quickly as possible. And so that's the process of what's happening here. What Kubrick has done is framed that and built it like if a horror movie villain could scream at you before he killed you, that's what R. Lee Ermey's doing. I mean, really, like, think of like, it's like he brought Jack Torrance back from the hotel and let him be a drill sergeant.
Oh yeah. R. Lee Ermey. Like I said, he's a non-actor, but he's a natural actor. Because as I understand it, he really was a drill sergeant. And an excellent commentary for Full Metal Jacket. He explains the actual drill sergeant process. Like, you can't just, like, a drill sergeant, like the training course for drill sergeants is like 6 weeks of even more extreme training than your typical Marine goes through. Like, the most fit guy on a Marine barracks is the drill sergeant, and so forth. So he is the real deal. But his constant screaming, it makes for such an oppressive first 45 minutes of this movie. Like, I remember watching this movie for the first time with my brother, and he just turned to me and said, "Is this guy going to yell for the whole movie?" Because as a movie audience, I can understand if movie audiences, I'm shocked to find out that it was such a hit, $120 million, because I mean, like the first half really is just like, guys, it's like, you really do feel that boot camp thing of just being screamed at for, the entire time.
Well, there's really two camps on the critics side. Like, people like Roger Ebert did not like this movie. He didn't trash it, but he said it was just kind of soulless. And he said, I get what Kubrick's trying to say, but in the process of doing that, he sort of stripped all the humanity out of this movie, and there's nothing to really latch onto. And Roger's not wrong about that. Other critics got it for what it was trying to be, and they praised the cinematography, and again, having a non-actor deliver such a powerful role, because Ermey will tell you, too, drill sergeants are actors. He said, you have to be in command. He said, everybody in command and management, whatever, is acting in some way. And you hear him talk, it's so funny to watch him talk like out of character, because he's such a soft-spoken, like, sort of genteel man, but then he could just turn on this monster out of nowhere. And again, like he said this was everything he had heard other drill sergeants say through the years, just taken to a level of heightened realism. I liken it, Kurt, to the way professional wrestlers like Stone Cold Steve Austin will tell you, like, that's me, but it's just me on 11 instead of like my usual 7. Yeah. And I kind of like, Ermey's very much like this. And what's funny is I see, like, through pop culture, how many people have done the Hartman thing in whatever they're doing, right? How many times have you seen this copied over and over and over again?
Yeah, it's one of those iconic roles where I can't think of another good example, but basically it's like, every drill sergeant character or of any kind that has come since 1987, guaranteed the actor just watch Full Metal Jacket as a quick refresher of how exactly to do. Even though certain actors have managed to put different spins on it, like I thought Vince Vaughn was really good in Hacksaw Ridge, putting a spin on it that was a little bit more likable. But I mean, this is definitely the blueprint of the drill sergeant. Although I have to note that I was looking at clips of the movie An Officer and a Gentleman the other day, because Lou Gossett Jr., he won an Academy Award for playing a drill sergeant, and I couldn't help but notice, it's like that movie came out in 1982, and there are a couple lines in there that show up in Full Metal Jacket. So I don't know if R. Lee Ermey's a fan of An Officer and a Gentleman, or if those really are just that common, a line that you hear, like the lines like, steers and queers and so on.
Oh, yeah. I think Ermey ripped that off completely from that, because he was just pulling from everything he knew. Lou Gossett Jr. and An Officer and a Gentleman, by the way, much more like what a real DI would be like, except for karate fighting somebody. You wouldn't do that. But other than that, that would be exactly what a DI would be like. I mean, he's almost the perfect version of one, from people I know that have done it. They're like, Lou Gossett Jr. is a little more realistic than Arlie Ermey. You know, like he'll get a word in every now and then, but most of the time he's there to try to get you to think. And, you know, Lou Gossett Jr. has a different cadence too. Like he would yell at him, but he didn't like go, constantly yell at him the way Hartman does. I also looked at part of that is he's in this big empty room. I don't know if you've ever been in a military barracks, but it's basically just like a big cafeteria with a bunch of beds in it. It's a big open room, so everything bounces off of itself. Sound wise, it's just a big concrete building because it's built on the cheap. All right, the military's not spending money on your comfort while you're in boot camp, and so his voice is just bouncing all over this place, and I can't imagine what it would be like to have that coming at you the whole time. But not only that, when we're meeting our characters, we've got Private Cowboy, who's kind of the short guy from Texas who gets the steers line, and then you got Private Snowball, who's like, man, you talk about be all you can be, dude. That's who I thought of from like Men in Black. He's that dude, you know, right? And then you've got Joker, you've got a few other guys, but then you've got Big Vince D'Onofrio, who is as he put it, he said, man, I had to eat like the worst food ever to get as out of shape as they wanted me to be. Cause he's a big dude. Anyway, he's like 6'5", 6'6". And like you said, he was working as a bouncer at a bar, which means he, you know, as Patrick Swayze taught us, you have to know when to be nice until it's time to not be nice. And clearly Vince D'Onofrio can handle himself. So he had to come in as like this big, doughy, kind of goofy looking dude. And that is, after years of watching him play really eccentric and interesting characters, it's weird to go back and watch him play like this big goofball.
Oh yeah, D'Onofrio, he's one of those actors. It's a mixed bag. He's done, he's done some bad movies, but his good performances, like his performance in Men in Black as the Bug / Edgar, is so insanely funny, and it's a great performance that, like, that's definitely a performance where no one has or will ever try to copy that because it would be impossible. And he's done stuff like In the Cell, which is a massively underrated movie, and he played Orson Welles in Ed Wood, even though his voice was dubbed over. And in this movie, he was a bouncer, and he was told he had to gain weight, and he put on 20 pounds, and he met with Kubrick, and Kubrick says, well, now you just look like you could kick everybody's ass. So he had to gain another, like he had to go from being, like a big tough guy to being, like sloppy. And he gained a full 80 pounds, and it shows. Like those, some of the scenes where he's having to climb up an obstacle and falling down, he said, I wasn't acting.
Yeah, exactly. Like he couldn't do it, which as strong as he was at the time, he couldn't pull some of that off. So that's very real. And it's neat to see him. You brought out two great performances there. Ben in Black, he's awesome in that. The Cell, I agree with you, massively underrated. We may have to get around to that one someday because that one's on Netflix and all the time. And I've seen it a couple times and I have lots of questions, so we can put that one on the shelf for a second. But I know him most from Law and Order: Criminal Intent. He was on that show for over a decade, and he is awesome in it. And the way he played that character was like a modern day Sherlock Holmes, like weird, kind of looked at things from the side, did different stuff, and they gave him a real character arc on that show with Catherine Irby, and he's great in that. And for years he just sort of disappeared into that role, and now you see him pop up, and he just does, I don't know, he just does random stuff here and there now and he does stage work because that's kind of his real passion and stuff. But the guy's an actor for sure. And even though these guys are young and maybe not minted, the thing Kubrick found in each of them were people that could be good character actors. Like Arliss Howard's a good character actor. And Matthew Modine is a good character actor too, even though he got cast in leading man roles for years. He's actually a really good character actor.
Oh yeah, Modine's a fantastic actor, and it is weird. It's like on the DVD they talk about Matthew Modine. It's like he wasn't a superstar yet, and it's like I remember watching that going, Matthew Modine was a superstar, because I guess if he was in big box office hits, I guess I didn't see him, but he's been in really good movies, like a lot of them of late. Like he's in The Dark Knight Rises, he's in Sicario 2, and in a movie around the time of Full Metal Jacket, it is another massively underrated movie. It's called Pacific Heights with Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton.
And that's an excellent movie. He's great in that too.
I saw that in theaters, actually, Kurt. I went with, I think my mother actually to see that. So, cause she was really into like thrillers and stuff. But yeah, I remember him in that. And I saw him in stuff like Gross Anatomy when he was trying to do, romantic drama stuff, and followed him for years. He's on Stranger Things now too. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, he still pops up and does that. And I remember when he popped up in the Nolan flick, cause I was like, that's what Christopher Nolan does, is find X stars from the 80s and reintroduces them to the world.
Sure.
Cause, if he could get Michael J. Fox in a movie, he probably would. So, and who's to say he didn't come out in this new one that he's got in a couple of years? But really, no, you've got all of these cool actors. And the thing is we see here is we really see Joker's transformation as kind of this wisecracking guy. That's why they call him Joker, because he makes the John Wayne joke, and kind of just sort of goofing around. And he's talking with one guy while they're, mopping the head about like, I wish I had your sister here, better than your mother, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And he's just being inappropriate to actually, at one point, Hartman just, says something to him and tries to get him to, I don't know, admit something about the Virgin Mary or whatever. And what you get from Joker is that they know he's an atheist. And he totally lays out this honest thing to Hartman's like, no matter what I say, it's going to be the wrong thing. So I'm trying to avoid further punishment. And Hartman's like, I appreciate honesty like that. And he makes him squad leader. Yeah. And he basically tells him, it's your job to make sure Pyle, the worst guy in the squad, makes it to graduation. And that's the arc we see, is Joker trying to get Leonard to do it right.
Yeah, that would be his arc in the first movie, and that thing about this movie is, in that first act, D'Onofrio, he only had, I should have counted. It's got to be under 100 words he actually says in the movie. Like it's almost entirely visual and physical performance. Same thing with Matthew Modine in the first chunk. Like Arliss Howard says, 8 words or so. And yeah, that is a great moment of where Hartman actually, punches him I think he hits him in the stomach or smacks him in the face about the Virgin Mary comment. And yeah, he says, it's like Private Joker is silly and ignorant, but he's got guts, and guts is enough. And that's when he gives him the promotion there.
And that's a comment too, I think, that Kubrick is trying to say about the military, is that I don't need guys to be original in the military, or at least in the Vietnam era military. The military wasn't looking for people with original thought. They were looking for people that would follow orders and that had the guts to do things that they weren't really built to do. No one is built to do the things that these men were asked to do and then had to go and do in war. No men are. You get made into that by training. And that's just how it is. And you're seeing that in a person where we're supposed to watch everything from his lens, like we've said. And we see that, later on when it gets to graduation, he gets assigned to the Signal Corps, and Hartman's like, what? Like, why are you doing that? Instead of being, a trained killer like I've, made you to be or whatever. And that's what makes Joker different than the rest of these guys until it doesn't, which, happens throughout the evolution. And I think that's part of what Kubrick is trying to say, is that the longer you're in that world, the more you're going to become like what they want you to be in it, because how can you not? There's nowhere else to relate to. There's no one else to talk to.
Oh yeah. And this character of Joker, he's a guy who, refuses to change who he is, whether in boot camp, and, he's, the kind of a key sign of what makes a person human is, one of the things is a sense of humor. And, he tries to keep that throughout the entire war. And I think he's a guy who, like, if you asked him, even if he's joking, like sometimes he makes a joke about killing people, he really is, he's just messing around. He's just like, he's trying to just keep a sense of humor just to keep himself sane. And, I like to think that that's kind of, his death in the movie is probably by the end of the movie is where, stops making jokes.
Well, yeah, that's what happens at the end of this movie. It's no longer a joke to him, because everything is a joke to him, even through the worst of things. And we'll get to one of those big turning points, but I want to talk about, and a question I had for you. I did not hear a single, why you are here, why this is going to happen, why you're going to go to war, other than that's what we're doing right now and you need to be killers. There's not a why to any of this. And I know I'm a non-military person, and so military people listen to this are going to lose their minds because I'm asking this. But I wanted to ask you, did you ever get a sense that anybody was trying to instill in these guys as the reason they were doing this? And if not, is that what Kubrick is trying to say about the Vietnam War and why it's so complicated for American history? Because we didn't really know why, or nobody could tell you why.
Well, I was actually thinking about that last time I saw it, is it could have just been a simple line of narration, which I would have liked to have heard why these guys are in the military. And I just assumed like in the 60s it was the draft. And why isn't Pyle just quitting? And like, screw it, I'm going home. It's like probably in the draft. And, if you get drafted, you either serve or you go to jail. Right. Or as his path would have been, he's probably going to end up, going to a mental institution. But like, that's probably why they're all standing there having to take these orders. Cause it's the law, 1968 or whatever.
Yeah, we should mention that's a good thing to point. We haven't had a draft since then in this country. You had to go through extreme lengths to get out of it. And some people did, some famous people did that we talk about all the time now. But yeah, it was hard to get away from that. And then some people just signed up on their own. And I got a sense that there are a couple of these guys that did it on their own, but guys like Joker and Pyle and, some of the others, that's just what they got their card in the mail and it was like, well, yeah. I'm not going to Canada and I'm not going to jail. No offense. They're not coming to see you, Kurt. So, nope. They're not running away. So they're just going to go because shrug. That's what you did. Like my dad joined because all of his brothers were in the Navy and that's just kind of what you did in his family to go away. But, he told me millions of times, he's like, if I'd have gotten a draft card, I would have gone. He said, because that's just what you did back then. You just went. And even in this country today, Kurt, like if you're 18 as a male in America, you sign up for selective service, which means if they ever reinstitute the draft, that's what they start pulling the cards from.
Is that right? I never.
That is true. I remember going and doing that when I turned 18 and thinking, I had like a medical reason I was never going to be able to be in the military. So I thought this will be funny if we ever get the draft because I'll be like, okay, you got real desperate if you come grab, me, but okay. Huh. So, but I remember thinking at the time, I was like, it's 1995. We're still doing that, and we haven't had to, since thankfully, because there's enough people who do volunteer to serve and that's amazing. But at this time, the ranks were depleted. They had to do something.
Oh yeah, like especially Vietnam. It's an extremely unpopular war. There's nothing. Apparently, I guess some people probably thought the idea of going to war was attractive. That's one of the better things about the Deer Hunters. Those are all guys that had the illusion, the same kind of illusion of war of like it's Pearl Harbor. It's like we're under attack. Yeah. We got to sign up, like a real Captain America type thing, and then they get over there and and then the Deer Hunter happens.
Right. Exactly. And these guys, like they're, even when we get to the war front part, there's that little part where they've got like some faux documentary group or whatever that's asking them like, hey, do you think the Vietnam people want you here? Are they accepting your help? And you get like random answers from them. We're like, I don't know, and the thing is the rank and file soldier doesn't. They're just doing what they're told. And that was the tragedy for so many of the vets that came back. And I know it's a caricature now, but you go watch that first John Rambo movie, the First Blood. Oh, yeah. That's a dark story about a Vietnam vet coming back. And the guy that wrote the book it's based on says he met a guy in an English class. He was teaching like night classes who was a vet who would just kind of talk to him to sort of work through some of his issues. And he said, I used to just have nightmares like, what if this guy loses it one day in the middle of class? And that's what he based John Rambo on. And that's where we were in America. It was a tough time to deal with that stuff. So, that movie came out in the early 80s. We weren't ready to talk about it then. Now in the later 80s is when we started to really have the conversation. And I just think it's neat that we don't have any real names except for two people here. Pyle, we know his name's Leonard, and Hartman, and we only know his last name. We don't know anything else about him. And everybody else is a nickname. And they even call each other that. They don't even, relate to each other on, hey, Henry. Really? Like that? I don't know. I just find that amazing that there's no other connection between them except just trying to survive this mess.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's maybe partially Kubrick or maybe partially, I always got the sense in boot camp that you're given a schedule basically for like, I don't know how long it is, if it's 6 weeks or 12 weeks, but you're given a schedule that there's basically zero, free time to, chit chat.
Yeah.
So like, the idea is that they never have a chance to catch up aside from that bit where they're, swapping up the latrine. But yeah, the fake names, I always saw that as that's Kubrick saying who they were before doesn't matter, and they're not going to, whoever they were before, they're not going to be that, by the end of the movie. I always be curious to see what Pyle was like before the army. Like, was he, cause I can't get in my head, is he a simple-minded guy, or is he just a nice guy in the most, a visceral situation?
I kind of always took him as if Lenny from In Mice and Men had gotten drafted into the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
I mean, he kind of is. I'm like, maybe he's not that simple or anything, but he's definitely not. I mean, this is a guy not going to MIT either. So he's probably working on the farm or, working at the local factory or something like that, which then there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, at all. I'm just saying, like, this is not, rocket scientist that we ripped out of, Virginia Tech or something to send to the military all of a sudden. And what we find, though, and this is when it starts to get real weird and scary, this movie, because this movie has almost no score except for the times when it wants Vincent D'Onofrio to be Jack Nicholson from The Shining.
That's right.
Yeah, they let him, he starts shooting the gun, and I love Hartman has that line, like, we finally found something you're good at, pal. Because he shoots better than everybody in the platoon, even though he's terrible at everything else. But he gets obsessed with his rifle, and Hartman's giving this whole speech about all these guys that have committed assassinations. And where did these guys all learn to shoot? The Marine Corps. And it zooms in on D'Onofrio's face, and I swear it's the same Jack Nicholson looking out at the snow and all that stuff, right?
Oh yeah, that's the Kubrick look 101. And that moment, that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie where Hartman's talking about who knows who Charles Whitman was, and that's the guy who, killed 12 people, and that the famous guy who killed people from a tower in Texas. Just on a side note, there's a sort of a documentary / animated movie called Tower that goes into what happened that day, which is a brilliant film. But Hartman is using that as an example as we want you to emulate that guy. Like he talks about Lee Harvey Oswald. It's like he killed a man and got off two shots on a guy. One of them was a headshot from 250 yards or meters away. So he says that's what we're looking for. If you can't shoot like Lee Harvey Oswald, you're not a decent Marine.
I know, like, what a horrible thing to say. And again, no real Marine drill instructor, politics or not, would ever say something like that. Like, no matter how callous and weird they were, like, only a complete and total monster would say that. And that's when you realize, like, man, this guy is beyond the pale. And he is who Kubrick wants you to think is the villain of this movie. Because that's the thing, is like, it's a war movie, so the opposition is supposed to be the villain, right? Not really. What Kubrick's telling you is the villain's here at home. The one that's training these people who says ridiculous stuff like this. But you see that look on, like, the other guys are sort of going like, is he for real? Especially like the men of color in the group are like, seriously? Is he like being honest about this? And then you've got, Powell over there just sort of soaking it in. And I'm like, man, this dude's a totally unhinged. This is going to end badly. And, again, I remember seeing this as a kid, and the way it turns out, it's not what you expect at all. And we got to talk about that scene because we've gotten through graduation. We do get Powell through. Somehow he makes the infantry. Can you imagine that guy in the infantry? But he's getting shipped out, all these other guys. And it's one of the last bits of voiceover we get from Joker. And he said, of course, I drew Night's Watch on the last night in the barracks. And he finds Powell loading up an M4 in the latrine. And talk about just a scene that will stick with you once you've seen it. Watching D'Onofrio sort of lay out all the statistics and, and that's where they get the line Full Metal Jacket and all this stuff. And he's loading that gun up, and then he starts going through his drills with it. And that's what, gets Hartman out of there.
Yeah. That scene, the movie takes a big shift in that moment. And it's such a disturbing thing because Pyle didn't necessarily know Joker was about to walk in there, so we're just walking in on a man. Like, can you imagine waking up at like 3 a.m, you walk into a washroom and there's a guy sitting there with a rifle, and he looks at the way D'Onofrio, like, he's good in the whole movie, but this scene is like an 11 out of 10. The way he looks and he says, "Hi, Joker," and just like full psycho, like Nicholson mode. And, it brings to mind something that D'Onofrio said before they made the movie. It's like they were filming the boot camp scenes, and it came up on the schedule that the next day was going to be that scene. And they were all heading towards their cars at the end of the day, and Kubrick looked at D'Onofrio and said, like, "You know what you're doing tomorrow?" He's like, "Oh, yes, sir." And Kubrick said, "Just remember, man, Lon Chaney big." It's like, that's what he's going for. We're going for Wolfman. We're going for, huge big acting here. Like, it's going to turn into a horror movie for a little bit.
And it does. It really does. And this is the one time we see Hartman not yelling at people. Because he comes in there and he's like going, what is going on here? And he's yelling at Joker like, why is Private Pyle not in his bunk? Why are you not beating him over the head? You know, all this kind of stuff. And he says, well, yeah, I've got to let you know he's got a loaded weapon, sir. And I love how he turns the volume down. Ermey does. He's like, now look here, Pyle. You're going to give me that weapon and you're going to put that on the deck and we're going to get out of here right now. This is not going to go the way you think. And what happens next, man? Again, I'll never get it out of my head watching Arlie Ermey get shot in the chest by this guy. And Matthew Modine's face just frozen in complete horror because you mentioned it, like if he hadn't walked in on him in there, who knows what he was about to do.
Yeah.
He could have gone through the barracks and executed half that squad before they got him down, right? Because again, he's the biggest dude in the squad. And then of course he sits down on the latrine and shoots himself. And it's just a horrible scene. And for me, I've often wondered, how do you ever pick up from that in a movie like this? Like, that seems like such an ending. And if it's not the ending, it's definitely the end of act one of a play where you leave people sitting in their seats with their mouths open.
Yeah, like, I've been watching a lot of older movies the last couple of days, and a lot of them have an intermission after a big scene where you have, like, you get your time to think about what happened or whatever. And I thought if there was ever a moment, even though it's a shorter movie, where you need like an intermission to take a break, to ponder what just happened, it's that, because that is such a shocking moment. Like, you're not ready for that. Like, you think you're just watching a movie about boot camp, and then we're going to cut to all these guys in Vietnam and everything. And no, it's, it calls back to that scene of where he says, Charles Whitman and Lee Harvey Oswald, I love this line, those individuals showed what one motivated Marine and his rifle can do. And before my island, you will be able to do the same thing. And what happens? If he didn't kill himself there, guaranteed that Pyle would have been another guy in a tower, or he would have done some horrible stuff in Vietnam. But whatever, he was broken down, from, innocent young man to a killing machine. And then he ends it by killing himself. And yeah, every time I watch the movie, it is so shocking how we fade to black and instantly we just kind of resume with the rest of the movie. And yeah, there's no good way to do that aside from making another whole other movie and calling it, Full Metal Jacket 2. And that's, the stuff in Vietnam. But yeah, it's like, that's a tough one.
It is. And the way it comes into that next scene, it's in the daylight and Joker's sitting there with, I think it's Rafterman or another guy. And it looks like they're, having a drink before going to a meeting. And one of the Vietnamese prostitutes walks up to him and basically propositions them. And I mean, it's kind of they play it off like a big joke, like, no, too expensive for us. My mom only lets me spend $2 sort of. And I'm like, just undercut that whole scene with this big joke. And I guess it's the only thing you can do to kind of bring your audience out of shock at that point, because we don't know how far forward we go. His hair's grown back out. He seems to be comfortable enough that he knows his way around. So he didn't just get there last week. We don't know how far ahead this has flashed at this point. And the other thing is, it's never referenced again. And I'm like, what a weird thing. Cause you think like everything in Act 1 should eventually pay off in Act 2 and then Act 3, right? And it's almost like Act 1 is this big other movie and then we're just going to totally ignore it and do another movie, now. And it's with the same people from that other movie, but nothing that they learned is really going to matter going forward, except you're going to see that Cowboy was a good soldier, and obviously learn things. And Joker's a better soldier than maybe he wants to give himself credit for. And that there are also people out there that are twice as crazy as anybody they met in boot camp, at like people like Animal Mother and 8 Ball that are just, running into open fire like that. And they get to see the horrors of war real quick. And I don't know, man, it's a jarring change.
Well, that's one of the things that makes this movie stand out, is that it is a relentless movie that never has a moment that really lets you ponder that. Like I think anyone else makes this movie, they would have a scene before Joker ships out where him and Cowboy just have a moment of like, what the hell was that? Like there's no moment where someone says that was pretty crazy, wasn't it? Like the movie just goes along like an hour and 50 doesn't give you any time to process what you saw until we fade to black at the very end.
Oh yeah, and I mean, even when he sees Cowboy later, they're just like, hey, they're hugging each other like, hey, it's good to see you, man. This is my guy from boot camp, and they say nothing else. You know, like, yeah, you know that boot camp I told you where that guy shot our drill instructor the last night we were there? Like, you think that would be like something you would tell people, because how could you not? Right? And also, the military is a very small place. People would know that story. It's not like you could have hidden that. Like, maybe the outside world wouldn't know that, but the dudes in the ranks would know that stuff. And that, it's so strange. What I'm blown away by here when I see the Lust Hog groups, or the Lost Hogs, whatever they call themselves, is I'm sitting here watching this and I'm like, I know this movie was made before it, but I can't not watch this and not think, like, in another life, this was the other Marine group that would have been with, like, James Cameron's Colonial Marines in Aliens. Like, it's the same kind of dudes. Like, the character types just repeat themselves.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, you know, this isn't the most, authentic, you know, true to life, Marine Corps, military movie. It's a little bit more of a, not necessarily, it's like, you know, there's no Hollywood, Army movie like this, but it is much more of, you know, fabrication, much like, you know, Aliens, where he wasn't trying to make the real thing. He was trying to make, you know, Cameron's version of what a Marine's like. And that's, you know, same thing with Kubrick. It's like, I don't know if Kubrick, Kubrick's not a military guy, so he doesn't really necessarily know what Marines sound like. But in, you know, Kubrick movie, they're going to talk like how Kubrick wants them to talk.
Well, that's the other thing, too, is Kubrick's not a military guy, but how many military movies have we seen this dude make? You know, Paths of Glory, Spartacus is a military movie. You know, I'm like, this is the third time around for this with him.
And fourth after Dr. Strangelove.
Oh, that's right. I always forget Dr. Strangelove is really a military movie. So, yeah, you're right. So it's not like it's not something the guy's not fascinated with, even though he's not, you know, quote, a military guy. He obviously is fascinated with different aspects of it. Like in Paths of Glory, it's all about leadership and responsibility and morality, right? In the face of, you know, corruption. And in Spartacus, it's about a rebellion, right? And a rebellion for a righteous reason and revenge in a lot of ways. And Dr. Strangelove is about absurdity and bureaucracy, right? And this movie is about the guys in the weeds of the Dr. Strangelove military. Because make no mistake, like, that's only a few years before any of this would be happening in real time. Like Dr. Strangelove made in the 60s. This movie's taking place in the 60s. So these are the guys that have to carry out the goofy orders of the dude sitting in the big room talking to the, you know, smoking weirdo, you know, scientist, right? I mean, that's what is happening. And I mean, you ask people that talk about Vietnam that are Vietnam experts, they'll tell you what messed that war up for America was the fact that you had people over here in America trying to run a war that was happening a world away, and you wouldn't let the commanders on the ground do what they knew how to do. So it was all very confusing.
Oh yeah. Chaos is sort of a theme of this movie and a lot of Vietnam movies. I mean, like it's, you know, like, it's all over Platoon is, like that's another movie where there isn't necessarily a plot. And one quote about Vietnam that I'll just never forget. It was in the Ken Burns documentary. I've only seen parts of, but it just stood out so much where a guy was talking about he would be in a battle and he'd look around and he's like, I already won a battle here. And he's like, and then he'd be there again. It's like, I've never heard in the history of war of having to reclaim the same spot 3 times. Like they didn't have to take Omaha Beach 3 different times. So it just like goes against the grain of what, you know, how you win a war. And that's kind of the whole thing with Vietnam. It was such a, you know, utter disaster where like as crazy as things are in this movie, I don't find them, unbelievable.
Oh, no, not at all. And I'll give you another one of the movies in this era of Vietnam movies called Hamburger Hill. I don't know if you've ever seen that or not. Talk about one that just displays the horrors of war for you. Hamburger Hill is named after exactly what you think it would be. And it is essentially the anthill. Remember the anthill from Paths of Glory? It's guys keep charging up this hill and getting mowed down to try to take it. And just spoiler alert for a 30-something-year-old movie, when they finally take it, the dudes that are survived are standing around looking at each other and they don't say a word. The look on their face lets you realize, like, we did all of that for this? And it was nothing. Like, there was no strategic advantage of having it. It didn't show them anything. There wasn't a cache of weapons. They didn't find the Lost Ark of the Covenant up there. Nope. They just did it because it was what they kept getting told to do. And in this case, I mean, these guys unload an unbelievable amount of firepower into a building that has one sniper in it. And we find out she's up there because the other troops are moving behind them, that they're trying to flank them, and she is there to distract them. And that is a big metaphor for all about fighting in Vietnam was we have all this superior firepower and we think we're going up against this huge army and it's one girl in a tower with a rifle who is just distracting us so that we don't pay attention to what's really going on back here.
Yeah, it's that scene, like, you know, obviously jumping ahead to the idea of this being like a teenaged girl. They don't really harp on the fact that how young she is, but I always think that's kind of that's a Vietnam hallmark. Is like that's another thing. I was like, that's one where, you know, they got the kids involved. It's like it was that insane of a war.
Vietnam's a hard thing to wrap our brains around because you would be trying to take objectives and you didn't know why. Like it was just because that's what you're supposed to do. Or when bad things would go down, like you get one of your guys killed by a booby trap and your lieutenant's out and you're like, I need some support because I'm getting shot at over here. And like, well, we don't really have a tank in the area. Well, then why am I here on maneuvers? I mean, nowadays the military is much more coordinated. They still, you know, make mistakes like everybody else, but they don't send squads out without knowing they got air cover for them. They got armor cover for them. They got, you know, something to be able to back the dudes up because they learned all of this from this. Like you send these guys just walking through the streets and they're going to get picked off and then they're going to get stuck in the middle of a firefight and you have no way to get support to them. Because again, the war's being run by people in Washington and not on the ground.
It is the most disorganized war. I mean, one thing about, like, you know, World War II, it's like you look at a map and you can see, like, without knowing, you know, anything, you can tell what the objective is. All the roads point to Berlin. Like, boom, that's it. Whereas Vietnam, it's like, you know, I'm 31. I've seen so many Vietnam movies and seen documentaries. I'm still not 100% sure what the end result they were looking for was in Vietnam.
I mean, the political answer is to stop the spread of communism in the area. America thought we'll go support the Vietnamese that want to be freedom fighters or want to be free. And by doing that, we'll show that, hey, you can't just march into people that don't want you here and take over land. You know, so one imperialist goes against another imperialist. That's really what it's about. And what failed was people were like, yeah, you know, I'd rather just live and not get shot at every day. And I don't care who's shooting at me. And that was the problem, is you couldn't get the people to like fight for themselves. You know, it's kind of part of the reason we're still involved in wars in the Middle East is trying to get, you know, that military to fight for itself is a whole other problem. You know, and I'm not comparing, you know, the two because it's a totally different thing, but that's what the political answer has always been, is that we were trying to stop the spread of communism in this area. It's, you know, Southeast Asia is a big shipping area that threatened Japan. We're friends with Japan. We're trade partners with them. We can't let them get threatened anymore by, you know, Chinese communism or Russian communism or anything else in the area, because that could really affect our market and all this kind of, it's all that kind of stuff. It's all about money and markets and all that kind of stuff and power. And it's also America trying to say, like, no, we're have a bigger sword than you. And then we took our big advanced military sword over there and got our teeth handed to us by people that knew how to fight in the streets and also knew how to organize, that's the funniest thing. And you talk about the disorganization of war. No better example of that is after the leader gets killed and Cowboy's got to take over and he's trying to tell the guys, stop shooting. I'm telling you, we need to just wait this out. And Animal Mother and these other guys are like, no, we got our guy down there. We're going to go get him. And they're just disobeying orders. So like all that training, a lot of good it did.
Oh yeah. It's, you know, you get that in Platoon too, where it's like very, I mean, in Platoon, that's the whole thing of the movies. These, you know, the two sides of the same unit going to war with each other. And, you know, this is a movie where, well, especially in that bit, everyone's a private, and, you know, it's, you know, tough. Everyone's basing, like, Animal Mother is certainly not taking orders. He's basing everything on emotion of, I don't care what anyone tells me. I'm just going to shoot over here until, you know, like, I feel better.
You ever look at Animal Mother, the Adam Baldwin character, and think, like, if, you know, Private Pile had been in shape and just a little bit smarter or a little bit more about his wits, that's what he would have become? Because it's kind of played the same way. Like, Baldwin sort of plays it the same way.
Oh, big time. I know that's, I think, I don't know if that was Baldwin who said that or someone, maybe one of the writers, but definitely, that is definitely a thing, is that Animal Mother is absolutely like, you could, if you really wanted to, you could have just had, you know, could have cut from the boot camp and have D'Onofrio play, Animal Mother and not change a line of dialogue. Like, the thing about Animal Mother is, I mean, he is pretty crazy, even if he's a little bit more of his faculties, but he's a little bit of a nutbag. It's one of my favorite lines as 8 Ball comes up, says, despite what you might think, Animal Mother's one of the finest human beings in the world. Under fire, you just need someone to throw hand grenades at him the rest of his life.
Right. Yeah. He's good in a fight because he is fearless. Like you talk about having guts. The dude has total guts. All these guys have guts. 8 Ball gets shot down in the street. The doctor goes after him again against orders. He gets shot. When he points out where the sniper's from to Cowboy, he gets shot. Or to Animal Mother. And then everybody runs over there. They huddle up together. And man, you talk about of all the deaths that are happening, and it's just gruesome all around us. When Cowboy got shot because he stood up in the window to use the radio phone to try to get some support again, I was like, no, please don't let him get shot in the back, because I forgot what happened to him. And he gets shot.
Yeah.
And then the way he goes down, he's like, no, I'm tough. I can take it. And they're like, yeah, you can take it. You can hack it. And then he just dies. I was like, oh man, that is just gut ripping.
It's a pretty Kubrickian scene because it's very unsentimental. There's no sad music. No one's crying. It's just very quiet and everything. And just on a side note about Arliss Howard, he is he's terrific in this movie and in other stuff. He's been in bad movies like The Lost World, Jurassic Park, but he's been in great stuff. Like I was just watching one of my favorite scenes in Moneyball, where he plays the owner of the Boston Red Sox, and he's so good in that movie. It made me think, did they just get the owner of the Boston Red Sox to play himself? Like he's that good in the movie, and he's terrific in this. And
no, he's great in it. And when he dies, like you can see something in Joker where he's like, no, not my guy. He's got Rafterman with him. He didn't really care about this dude, right? And Rafterman's funny because he's like, man, I want to see some action. And Joker's like, nah, not really. I mean, we did talk about it, but there's that whole scene where they're sitting around the table and they're like, reword that to this and say it was minimal casualties. And all this, you just see like, well, we're just spinning the same thing that they're spinning out of their side too.
Oh yeah, like he says, change search and destroy to sweep and clear.
Yeah. I mean, right? I mean, but again, that's what we do, and more, that's what the war correspondents there were doing. Yeah. And, he's over there trying to do that. And then at this moment, he's like, no. And when Animal Mother's like, let's go get some payback, and you see it in his face, like, yeah, let's go do it, And so they go into the building, they corner that girl sniper. I love the scene where his gun jams, his M16 jams, and he drops it, and he's, of course, as you would be, she's just unloading the AK-47 near him, and he's trying to pull out his sidearm and can't get it out quick enough. And I'm like, man, Joker's going down.
Yeah, that's that whole scene. This entire that's the last 30 minutes is essentially this extended, short film about getting pinned down by a sniper. And I like that. Like they think they're under attack by an entire squad, and then they find out, and not only is it just one person, and not only is it a woman, but it's it's this just one girl. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it makes me think of Hartman talking about, what one motivated Marine and a rifle can do. It's like, that's what this girl is. Like, if they didn't manage to get the drop on him, she probably would have taken them all out.
No, you're exactly right. And I think that line does ring forward again and again. What one motivated soldier with a rifle can do, she's at an elevated position. Even when they get close, she's just gunning them down. And what happens is, who comes to save the day? Rafterman. And he shoots her. And of course, he's like, he's all jazzed up. And of course, Joker's just like, how am I alive right now? Like he's having a total Pulp Fiction, how did the bullet miss me moment, standing up there. And what I find just harrowing is that all these guys' faces are lit by the fires that are around them, because we've seen kind of night fall around them as they're pinned down by the sniper, and their faces are all lit up by the fire. And the one guy's like, I mean, she's laying on the ground, like, begging for her life, basically. Or I think Joker says she's praying or something like that. She's bleeding out. And this one soldier's like, nah, I'm done. And he's ready to go. And Animal Mother's like, if you want her dead, do it yourself. And I'm like, of all the guys have like wasted an incredible amount of ammunition, and now they're doing, ordnance check. Like, no, we can't waste a bullet on this one. Just let her die. And it's like the cruelty of all of it, right? Like, she doesn't deserve to be put out of her misery. Just let her sit there and bleed to death. And they basically put it to Joker, like, if you want her dead, shoot her yourself.
Oh, that is a brutal scene. And the girl she literally, I don't know how she picked up this in English, but she starts saying, shoot me. Mm-hmm. And it's again, like you said, there's only like 3-4 moments in the entire movie that have score. And this is one of them. This is, a really brooding, dark menacing score. And it really is like and this whole scene is about, like I said, this moment of Joker's been the guy where, you know, if we saw scenes in between the scenes, he would be the guy that's like, man, that was weird. It's like, well, glad that's, you know, that's not me. And this is the scene where, you know, it's like, you know, Private Pile, he broke in boot camp, and Private Joker, it took him a little bit longer. And this is definitely his breaking point. Not like he's going to snap and turn into a psychopath, but like this is the moment where, you know, he loses his sunny disposition and his what do you call it, uniqueness, distinctiveness, and kind of just becomes, you know, one of the guys. And these are all the guys, the kind of guys that you know, think of the, you know, shooting a kid in the head as, you know, that's just their 9 to 5.
Well, I mean, at this point, he's always thought of this again as a joke, or that he was kind of somehow above all this intellectually, somehow, right? Like he was sort of just keeping himself in cognitive distance of this. Even when he's talking with Rafferman, who wants to see action, he's like, nah, I've seen a little bit. You don't want to do that. And whether he had or not, you never know. But you get the sense that Joker's never, you know, fired on anybody. He's never shot anybody. When they're flying in the helicopter and the guy's just mowing people down in the rice paddies, and they're both just sitting there horrified at like, why? You know, like, and the guy's like, well, why not? You know, and I mean, he like that horrible joke about, you know, how you shoot women and children, you just lead them less. And it's like, what a wow, you know, and you hear that guy say that, and it's played off as a joke, but the look on their face is like, wow, we're never going to become that. And then Joker now is at the point where he's got to make a choice, and he chooses. I think you mentioned this earlier, Kurt. It was a great line, is that this is where he dies. And I'm like, man, I never thought of it like that, but I think you're right. I think this is where his soul is like gone, because he shoots her.
Oh yeah, like I said, he's been hanging on to his individuality from the jump, the kind of person he was before the war. Like he probably, like, you know, like the journalism. And I don't know how that works. Maybe he signed up for that before he enlisted, but like he knew that's where he was going to end up. And he's like, you know, I'll be able to, you know, keep an even keel. I'll probably write a good book about this when I get back, but, you know, I'll be the guy that has the safe, normal career in Vietnam, and, you know, and I'll go home, you know, safe and sound. And then, you know, the chaos and circumstances of Vietnam. Like, I don't know if Kubrick is saying this or not, but I like the idea that, you know, Joker thinks that he's the one who can't break, and in Vietnam, you know, everyone breaks. Yeah.
And then the final scene of it, of the guy singing the Mickey Mouse Club song, and, you know, they're just silhouetted by the fire around them, and you hear the planes flying over and the bombs dropping, and, you know, they're going off to another fight. And it's like these boys that have been turned into men at this moment have decided, we just need to be boys for a little bit, just for a minute.
Yeah, there's two ways of looking at that, because I've seen people say, you know, that's one, like, seen people look at that ending and just say, what the hell was that? But when I first saw the movie, I dug it. But there are two ways to look at that. One of them is that Kubrick is sort of, you know, he's taken away the real world and he's making this a metaphor for them, you know, kind of having to, you know, devolve back into children in order to, you know, process what's happening, or they're devolving into children playing cowboys and Indians in Southeast Asia. But I prefer to think of it as, you know, they're all realizing how dark these times are, and one guy just started singing the song, and they all watch TV. You know, they know the words, and they just start singing along to pass the time. But no matter how you slice it, it just creates this incredibly surreal moment of these guys singing a Disney song, and amongst all this, you know, horror. I can't help but think of A Clockwork Orange, guy singing in the rain, doing what he's doing, and that's, you know, Kubrick's a fan of that.
Yeah, he loves ironic music choices.
Oh, yeah.
And always has. And I mean, definitely that won't be the last time we see him do it, because we'll get it next time too, in his last film. And he does it again here. And it leaves us with the ambiguous ending. I mean, it just cuts. That's it. And then you get a little music and, you know, black and white credits, and that's it. And I mean, I've never not watched this, Kurt, and not gone, and then what? I just feel like I'm left with something here. And so I wanted to ask you this. Like, in my head, you could tack 25 more minutes, maybe 30 on that front end when they're in boot camp, and you got a complete movie. Or you tack another 25 on the end of this, and we deal with the fallout of it, and you've just got the standard Kubrick long movie. Which one do you think would work better?
Well, it is weird. Like I said, I think if anyone else made this movie, you would have 30 minutes on the beginning of the movie, like get to see Private Pyle or Lawrence, with his family and them suggesting, maybe you should enlist, like the patriotic slant of it. It's like, you should, serve your country and so forth, and have each person's motivation of why they're enlisting. I think that's what other filmmakers would do. And if you tacked it on the end of it, you would have Joker or all the other characters really explain and go over what happened. Like in Deer Hunter, they do that. Like that scene at the very end of Deer Hunter where they're sitting around the table singing, I can't remember which song it was, God Bless America, I guess. It's like a moment like that. But Kubrick says, well, the characters aren't going to be left to think about this. Like, that's your job as the audience, almost like 2001. It's like, I'm not going to tell you what happened. It's like, you figure it out.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the connection with 2001, but you're right. It's the same kind of ending. It's, what's the space baby? I don't know. What do you think it is? So what do you think any of that was? So, really, like, Kubrick always leaves you asking. At least he does it in a lot of his films. Not every film. I mean, some of his films have a definite ending. The Killing has an ending. I mean, it's pretty clear that guy's going to jail. We know, and that's, Passive Glory. You know what's happening. Those guys are getting sent back to the front lines to die. That is what's happening there. Doctor Strangelove, well, we all just got nuked. So, that goes. And then Spartacus dies the end of Spartacus. You come back to this one, and where these guys are probably all marching off to die. Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. Like, the only thing for me, like, if I could dream up a, third act or whatever, you go to modern times and you see Joker in the 1980s trying to be a yuppie or whatever and deal with all of this, in some way, and some kind of Ordinary People sequel or something like that. But otherwise, I don't know how you wrap it up. And again, to hear the actors tell it, Kubrick didn't know how to end it either. Yeah. He was just like, I don't know. We'll just figure it out someday, And they just came up with this, and there's the ending of the movie.
Yeah, and going out on Painted Black, the Rolling Stones, I don't know if it's their trippiest song, whatever you want to call it, but it's a very, like, as if you don't feel kind of dark and brooding enough, they hit you with that, and it's like, like Kubrick's just not going to let you feel good, during this movie.
No, and Painted Black is a very weird Stones, even for the Stones, like, they're a blues band, and then they came up with this sitar-infused, satanic sounding thing, and it's like, what is going on with these guys? And it's a trippy tune, you're right, and it's a good one to end it on here. Well, I think we're at the part of the podcast, Kurt, where it's time to give final thoughts, recommendations, popcorn ratings, so what are yours for Full Metal Jacket?
Well, Full Metal Jacket is Kubrick changing directions like he always does in his career. He does sci-fi, historical epic, horror movie, and then he moves on to Vietnam. Now, there's not a whole lot in this movie that reminds me of what I think of when I think of Stanley Kubrick, in a way. It's much faster paced. Like I said, it's very relentless. It's much faster paced than his last couple of movies have been. It makes me think it is a damn shame that he did wait so long to make his next movie, because the way his style was evolving, making, faster paced movie, it's like, geez, too bad he didn't make a movie, 1990 or whatever like that. What was that movie? The Aryan Papers was the movie he almost made, but then he didn't. But I think Full Metal Jacket is it's a great war movie. It's not quite as great as certain other Vietnam movies like Platoon or Apocalypse Now, which are personal favorite movies of all time for me. But it's definitely a unique take on Vietnam. Very much, it's interesting hearing that Ebert had a problem with this. I thought the whole point of the movie was it's a movie about the dehumanization of young men into killing machines. It's about that process from start to finish. It's like in Apocalypse Now, Martin Sheen's already crazy when we meet him. And in Full Metal Jacket, it's like we get to see how he got that way, in a way. And I think it's one of my favorite Kubrick scripts. This was Kubrick's final Oscar nomination. The movie was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. I think it's a pretty funny movie with some great dialogue in that second half. And it's the closest Kubrick ever got to making a movie with naturalistic dialogue that resembles anything the way real people sound like, in my opinion. Fantastic cast led by Matthew Modine as a very relatable everyman in Vietnam. You got Vincent D'Onofrio as an extremely relatable type guy who joins the Marines as a normal guy and is slowly but surely driven mad. It's a brilliant acting job. But of course, my favorite performance in the movie is by a guy who wasn't even a professional actor, R. Lee Ermey, as the definitive cinematic drill instructor. I don't know how he wasn't nominated for Best Supporting Actor Oscar for this, because it's truly a, one-of-a-kind performance. Like I said, the blueprint that all boot camp drill instructor roles have followed. And it's even easier to appreciate, after when you see, like you said, that Ermi in interviews couldn't possibly seem like a nicer, more easygoing guy. So it's like, oh, this guy, he really is a good actor. And it really is one of the best performances in a Kubrick movie. Like right up there with Peter Sellers in Strangelove or Malcolm McDowell in A Clockwork Orange. It's not my favorite Kubrick movie. It'd be probably right smack in the middle of the filmography. But I still think it is an exceptional war movie, and it's an extra large popcorn for me.
I have a complicated relationship with this movie, Kurt, and I've laid that out at the beginning, and I don't think I've changed my mind on it throughout. I always feel like the first part of this, the act one, is so good. It's some of the best Kubrick stuff ever, and it's some of the simplest. It's not real elaborate shots. It's nothing more than what you see with good dollies and moving people around. But the way he gets that naturalistic dialogue, like you said, I'm glad you called that out because that's exactly right. It's closer to the way real people would talk if Kubrick understood real people at all. And clearly he does not. So, and never did. So, because he was very extraordinary himself. So to see that come to fruition and then end on such a punch note, there's no way the second half of the movie can't let me down every time. And part of it is, I think I latched into Pyle and maybe Hartman more than I did Joker. And that's nothing against Modine. I think he's great in this movie. It's just, I got what that guy was about and I didn't like him. And I don't think you're supposed to like Joker. I think you're supposed to look at him and think this guy thinks he's above all of this and that he can keep this humor to keep this cognitive dissonance from war. And the reality is he cannot, and it will break him. At some point it breaks everybody and it breaks him. And I think the hard part for me in the second half of this is I don't know who I'm supposed to root for except maybe Cowboy. And that for me makes a hard cinematic experience. Now, is it brilliantly shot? Does it look awesome? Absolutely. Terrence Malick borrows a lot from this for Thin Red Line, in my opinion. And I think that's a fantastic war movie. And it's very much more in line with this, actually, than something like Saving Private Ryan or anything like that. But I just don't have any characters I can follow. And that's hard for me to really love a movie like that. So for me, the first half of this is awesome. The second half is a big letdown. And it always is every time I've watched it. And I'll say this too. This is a hard movie to watch. I mean, it's hard to watch this and just not feel really, I don't know. When I got done watching this, honestly, man, I felt like I need to watch some cartoons or something. I'll tell you what I went and watched when this was over. I went to Netflix and watched the Fast and the Furious movie because I needed to just go into that land for a little while and not live in this headspace anymore. I do think that makes this movie remarkable, though. So it is worth seeing, but it is a hard watch. It's probably in the middle, maybe the lower middle for me on the Kubrick scales. And when I try to balance it out, I'm like, how do I give this a popcorn rating that really reflects my feelings? And for me, the second half of it is something I just can't get through enough. And the first half is so good, though, that I'm like, if you just watch half of it, and then when Hartman's gone, let it go, because there's nothing else you need to know unless you just want to see Joker disintegrate, and it'd be like watching Breaking Bad. And if you stopped after, Walt, won on top of the parking garage, not to completely spoil everything tonight, right? If you just quit there, you're like, okay, I'm good. You want to watch Walt completely fall apart? Keep watching the rest of that show. I feel like Full Metal Jacket about the same way. I'm going to give this a medium popcorn, but the very respectable, definitely good medium, but it's the second half that weighs it down for me. So I can't give it harder than that, though that first part is extra large, but then the back half of it is teetering from small to medium for me. So that averages down to medium when it comes down to Full Metal Jacket.
Oh yeah, like you said, like I said, it's almost like it's if you said it was two completely distinct years that they made it, because it's the first half and the second half are so distinctly different, almost like they could be completely different films. So almost like when you review the movie, you almost have to you do the first act, review that, then you do the second act, review that.
Yeah. It'd be like if you went back and watched something like Gone with the Wind, which I know is problematic for a lot of people nowadays, but if you just review that for a movie or whatever, the first half of that is so much more watchable, though the second half has the best human moments in it. So, but it's a lot harder to watch too when everything, goes to hell and back. And I don't know, it's hard to come back from something like that. And I'm with you, man. It's amazing to me that Kubrick didn't make another movie for nearly 13 years. after this. It took him that long to get something else back on the screen. And man, we're going to wrap up the Kubrick series next time with Eyes Wide Shut. And Kurt, I've only seen it once, and man, I am ready for the loads of answers that you can have to my questions, because I remember things about that movie that I wish I could forget.
Yeah, I'll do my best. It's such a weird thing about Kubrick, is he has this, almost like a Mount Rushmore of movies, directing career, and he goes out on a note. I wouldn't say it's a bad note. I mean, we'll get into it, but he does go out. It must be the weirdest note a filmmaker has gone out on, because it's clearly a movie that he put some effort into, some work and some thought behind. But I mean, it's a movie where, I would love to ask him. It's like, why did you make that? Even his wife said, please don't make this movie.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it when we get to it, but I'm looking forward to reviewing that one, wrapping up our Kubrick series. And then after that, on the Film Strip Session show, I'm going to get you to come back on, and you and I are going to do like our list of ranking these Kubrick movies all together, because I don't want to tag that onto the end of Eyes Wide Shut. Let that review stand on its own. We can look back over all of these we've done over these last few years and put them in an order that you and I both can give our orders on them and talk about them and just sort of wrap up Kubrick in a bow, because man, I could talk about it for years, and clearly we have, Kurt. I mean, we've talked about this guy for years, and so it's kind of sad to know that the Kubrick series is ending, but that's not the end, of course. There's always more podcasts to be had.
Absolutely, yeah. We gotta find some other director to tack on.
The director, actor, something. We'll have to find something new to come up with. So if you got ideas, folks, throw them at us. Follow us on Twitter at FilmStripPod, or find the Filmstrip Podcast page on Facebook, or go over to the Fabish Factor page.
Absolutely, yep. Find us on the Fabish Factor group on Facebook, where we get into discussions very much like the ones we just had during this podcast, where you'll find the various letterboxed film reviews that I do. At the time of this recording, I'm in the middle of a challenge where I've been asked to talk about a contrast. I've been doing reviews of various Hollywood musicals. Last night I watched Oliver, and the night before Fiddler on the Roof, and today I had to recap and watch Full Metal Jacket. Now that's a hell of a shift.
I hope you enjoyed our musicals in November that we did when we had The Sound of Music in Chicago. Because you can't get more of a switch from those either, I'll tell you, Kurt.
No.
That's fun though, man. Always kinds of cool stuff happening on. And of course, folks, follow the show. Leave us a positive review if you find us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever you get us. It helps other people find the show. The downloads have just been going up. We're getting more and more audience again, and it's great to be back with everybody, and we appreciate your support. So until next time, for Kurt, I'm Jay. You've been listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.